All right, we got more factoring today, day 5, factoring by grouping, which this one's actually, I think, really fun to do, but, just throwing it out there. All right, we are going to hop right on in. We'll save any practice, warm-up questions for next time I see you in class. So the first example that I'm going to give you looks like this: 5a cubed minus a squared plus 5a and then minus 1. So at this point, if you think of all the different methods that we know, GCF, difference of squares, difference in sum of cubes, trinomial factoring, as well as kind of slip, divide, slide, whatever we called it. If you look, none of those fit the bill. There is no GCF. Many of those methods require either 2 terms or they require 3 terms. And then here's a case where we have 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. Right? So when you see that there's no GCF and we have 4 terms, and I'm going to say 4 plus because technically there can be more than 4, but most of the time it's going to be 4. What we're going to look for is something called factoring by grouping. And it's called that because that's exactly what we do. So step number 1 is we actually are going to group the terms 2 by 2. And usually we will just take the first 2 and group them together, take the second 2 and group them together. When we group them, what we're then looking to do is to take a GCF out of each group. So in the first 2, they both have an a squared, so I can take a squared out front, and then I'm left with 5a and then minus 1. In the second 2, I really don't have much for a GCF. So in this case, I can just use a 1 as my GCF, and then I'll be left with 5a minus 1. Because I factor out a positive 1, I'm going to put a little plus sign there. What our goal is right here, and this is important, the goal is to be left with the same factor in the parentheses. All right, so I'm going to say to have the same parentheses in each grouping. So we have 5a minus 1 here. We got 5a minus 1 there. So we are off to a good start right here. All right, the whole reason for that is now what we're allowed to do is we're allowed to factor out the resulting parentheses factor. All right. So what I mean by that is if this one has the 5a minus 1 and that one has the 5a minus 1, that is actually a greatest common factor between these 2 terms that we now have. So I can take that 5a minus 1 out front, and then what I'm left with is an a squared from here and a plus 1 from over here. So into the second parenthesis will go the a squared and then the plus 1 from the second parenthesis, or from the second grouping, excuse me, right? And then, if possible, keep factoring. So I'm just going to say factor completely if needed. So this particular one, 5a minus 1 isn't going any further. A squared plus 1 isn't going any further either. If it was a squared minus 1, we could keep going, but that's it. So this is our answer in factored form. Now, could we check it? Sure. Now, these ones I'm not going to require you to check, but I just want you to show yourself even really that you can say, like, let me see, did this even really make sense to me? So 5a minus 1, a squared plus 1, multiply it back out. 5a times a squared would be 5a cubed. 5a times 1, a squared times a negative 1, and then negative 1 times positive 1. Well, if I look at all those terms, here's the 5a cubed, here's the minus a squared, there's the plus 5a, and there's the minus 1, and it matches up. Right? So that is how you can be certain that you did this correctly. So let's try a second one. Sometimes it just helps to to see another one to make sure, like, does this make sense? So let's say that that was example number 1, and now we'll call this next guy example number 2. All right, when I slide it on up, I'm going to give you x cubed plus x squared minus 4x minus 4. Okay, so as you're looking at it, first things first, run through your head, what are all the different types of factoring? There's not a GCF among all 4 terms, and the fact that there's 4 terms to begin with kind of rules out all the other methods other than GCF. So let's start grouping 2 and 2. So first 2 and last 2 is always the way that I would try it. It is possible you would need to rearrange them, but I'm going to tell you that's more of like a pre-calc level type question. All right, so in the first 2, my GCF here would be an x squared, and I'm left with x plus 1. In the second 2, my GCF is a 4. If I take out 4, I would be left with negative x and then minus 1. Because I know I want these factors to match, rather than leaving the negative in there, if we factor the negative 4 out with it, divide that by negative 4, I'd get a positive x. Divide that by negative 4, I would get a positive 1. So in this case, you might have to be a little crafty. I'm going to write a little note here to factor out negative 4, not just 4, so that the factors match. Right? Now that they both have the x plus 1 is what I can factor out front. What I am now left with is from this first term, when you take x plus 1 out, I'm left with the x squared. From the second term, when you take the x plus 1 out, all that's left is the minus 4. All right. The last step, factor completely if needed. Well, x plus 1 isn't going anywhere, but this guy, that's difference of squares. We can take that one step further. So x plus 1 here, and then this would be x plus 2 and x minus 2. Do you have to multiply it completely out to check? No, only if you're kind of questioning if you did it correctly. Then I would say, yeah, go ahead and multiply it out and see. Right? Hopefully after seeing 2 examples, you're like, all right, I'm getting the hang of this. Sometimes it takes a few to really get it. For the third one here, if I give you 2x cubed minus 10x squared plus 7x plus 21, same thing, you've got 4 terms. There's no GCF across the whole thing. So we know we're looking at grouping. So if I group 2 and 2, in the first 2, they have 2 and then x squared in common. When we divide that from each, that would leave me with x and then minus 5. From the second 2, they can take out a 7, or we can take out a 7, I should say, from each. That would leave me with x and then plus 3. If you hit something like this, where now I have x minus 5 here and x plus 3 here, that doesn't mean you did something wrong. What this actually means is it's not factorable. So it doesn't always work, right? And I show you that on purpose because sometimes people then press on and just keep making up their own thing from here. Don't do it. Now, it could be that if you rearranged it differently, you would find factors that would make it work. But in this case, promise you, it's not going anywhere. So if you hit it where you end up with 2 different factors, stop, call it quits, or check your work and figure out like what the heck happened. All right, no tricks, I promise. This next one, see if we can do this. We've got 8x to the 4th plus 24x cubed plus 125x plus 375. Whew. Now, if you want a challenge, pause the video, try it on your own, and then hit play and see if your answer matches. Otherwise, looking at it from start to finish, 8, 24, 125, 375, there is no GCF here. All right. If I group it 2 and 2, I can see a GCF though. Right? So for the first part, I can divide 8x cubed out of each. I would left with just an x here and then just plus 3 here. For the second piece, if you're ever not certain, grab your calculator. So 375 divided by 125, yep, that's going to go in very nicely 3 times. So if we take a positive 125 out, you're going to be left with x plus 3. So let that first factor kind of help guide you into that second one. Now, because they both have the x plus 3, we know we can keep going. So the x plus 3 is now the GCF. What I'm left with is the 8x cubed from right here, and then the plus 125 from over here. All right, last step. Can we keep going? Well, it might not be completely obvious, but when I have 2 terms plus in between, you got to check and see, is this sum of cubes? 8 is a perfect cube, x cubed, obviously. 125 is a perfect cube. So maybe off to the side, you do a little bit of work. The cube root of 8x cubed is just 2x. The cube root of 125, that's going to be 5. All right. Don't lose the x plus 3. So this stays. X plus 3 is going to stay. In terms of this is now going to be 2x plus 5. All right. In the second parenthesis, I'm going to put it above and then I'll copy it down. It's going to be 2x, that first part squared, the product of 2x and 5, and then the last part squared. Oops. And I just realized my signs are a little off, so I'll fix them as I bring them down. All right. 2x squared is 4x squared. It's minus for that second value, so minus 10x, and then plus, this is going to give me 25 right there. Look at all those different types of factorings coming together right there. Ooh, you've really got to be solid on your skills to correctly get through a problem that looks like that. With that being said, I think any other practice, I think we got one last one to look at, and then we'll call it quits, because it's worth seeing this one because it's a tiny bit different. I'm going to hop on over to the next page here, but this is the last one of your notes today. So if you have room, see if you can sneak it in here. All right, example number 5. We're going to give you 4x cubed plus 2x squared minus 36x minus 18. All right. 4 terms automatically means we're definitely looking at factoring by grouping. But don't forget that you could have a GCF here. Now, for one like this, I can actually take a GCF out of all of those, which means I can take the GCF out first, or I can kind of show you guys how if you do it second, you can still kind of weasel it out in the final answer. Let me show you what I mean by that. So let's pretend that we didn't recognize there was a GCF and we just started doing our work. All right. This would take out a 2x squared, and this would leave me with 2x and then plus 1. Here, 18 can divide nicely out. So if I factor out a negative 18, that would leave me with 2x plus 1, just like that. 2x plus 1 is now my common factor. And then what I'm left with would be the 2x squared here, and then the 18 here. So even though I didn't take out that 2 initially, now I'm going to get to be able to take it out when I go to factor this piece of it. So these ones are kind of foolproof, which is nice. If you now take out a 2, this would be x squared minus 9, and then I can completely factor it. The only thing you don't want to do is really kind of leave that 2 hanging out in the middle of the problem. So I'd still probably bring that up front. And then this can split into difference of squares. So x plus 3 and x minus 3. If you had started it and you're like, but I saw the GCF, then that would look differently is that your first step would have been to take a 2 out front. And maybe even you use a different set of parentheses, maybe make it a bracket. And this would have been, 2x cubed plus x squared minus 18x and then minus 9. And then you would have gone along your way of grouping here and here. And I promise you'd still get to that final answer at the end. Right? Okay, that's it. Go answer that post-video question. See you guys soon.